Nature often reminds us of its unpredictable power, and avalanches stand as one of its deadliest forces when unleashed upon the mountains. In this chilling story, an entire herd of mountain goats faced a sudden disaster that no living creature could ever prepare for. High on the icy slopes where these creatures usually thrive, silence was broken by the thunderous roar of collapsing snow. The goats, skilled climbers who survived the harshest winters, were caught in a storm of ice and debris with no way out. Witnessing such an event shows us the fine line between survival and tragedy in the unforgiving world of nature. This tale carries more than shock, it reveals the fragile balance between wildlife and the violent side of natural forces. We bring you the story of strength, loss, and the merciless beauty of the mountains as this avalanche swept all in its path. Before we dive deep into this heartbreaking event, make sure to like and subscribe for more stories of nature's raw power. Your support helps us bring hidden tales of the animal kingdom and their struggles against disasters to light. Now, let us uncover what truly happened when the avalanche buried the mountain goats alive in frozen silence. 1. The silent mountains before the fall. The mountains stood tall, quiet, and serene, their peaks covered with glistening snow that seemed eternal. The goats climbed with confidence, their hooves tapping lightly on the icy ridges without fear of collapse. The wind whispered across the ridges, cold but calm, carrying no warning of the storm that would come. The sky was clear, with the pale sun resting above the snowy cliffs like a frozen guardian of the heights. For centuries, these slopes had offered safety to the herds, sheltering them from predators lurking below. Every step of the goats was measured, their instincts trusting the stability of the hardened snow beneath. The mountain birds soared overhead, their wings slicing through thin, icy air in rhythmic freedom. No sound disturbed the silence, except the soft crunch of hooves and the occasional bleating of kids. The herd spread widely, grazing on patches of hidden moss and grass beneath thin ice crusts. They moved with grace, their white fur blending almost perfectly with the silver surface of the cliffs. The mountain itself seemed eternal, strong, and immune to sudden change or violence of nature. No tremor shook the earth, no crack split the silence, only the vast calm of frozen wilderness. Generations of goats had lived and perished on these slopes, and still the mountains gave them life. The elders of the herd had walked these cliffs since birth, memorizing every ledge and crossing. Nothing in their long memory suggested danger, the slopes always held, the snow always stayed. 2. The crack in the frozen silence. It began with a faint sound, a fracture in the stillness so small that only the mountain felt it first. The herd paused, ears twitching, but the noise was gone as quickly as it had arrived, like a sigh. The mountain skin was breaking, layers of snow shifting against one another under hidden weight. The crack deepened, spreading like lightning beneath the surface, invisible yet deadly in its reach. What seemed solid was not, the snow was a trap of weakness waiting for the right moment to fall. One wrong step, one echo too loud, one gust of wind could unleash the mountain's buried wrath. The goats resumed climbing, unaware that their fate had already been written by frozen forces. A stone dislodged by a careless hoof tumbled downward, vanishing in silence before striking below. That falling rock triggered another slide, tiny at first, but enough to stir the resting avalanche. The fracture widened, stretching like a scar across the slope, preparing to rip open in fury. The snow moaned, a deep hollow groan that shook the stillness, yet the animals did not understand. The ice above began to crumble, loosening particles that glittered in the sunlight like false jewels. 3. The herd's final climb. The mountain goats, proud and sure-footed, continued their ascent as if nothing around them had changed, unaware that every step was a gamble on a slope that had turned into a fragile wall of death. Their hooves dug into the snow, breaking tiny layers, sending whispers of ice trickling down toward the valley, each flake a messenger of the chaos that was quietly preparing above their heads. The youngest kids followed their mothers closely, pressing against them for warmth and safety, never realizing that the snow itself was more dangerous than the wolves that haunted the lowlands. Every leap carried them higher into danger, the herd scattered across ledges that were no longer safe, yet instinct drove them to climb as it had for centuries, trusting the mountain's strength. The air grew heavier, filled with a silence that was not peace but suffocation, the stillness of nature holding its breath before releasing a scream of unstoppable destruction. The goats grazed briefly on the brittle moss peeking through the ice, tearing at it with determination, as if feeding in those final minutes would prepare them for the fate waiting above. Snow cracked faintly under their weight, yet the sound was lost among the winds, muffled like a secret the mountain wished to keep hidden until the last possible second. A few goats looked up, staring at the looming wall of white, but their instincts did not translate the image into danger, for they knew hunger and predators, not avalanches and falling worlds. The slope above them sagged slightly, shifting with the pressure of the herd's presence, ready to break free like a cage door snapping open to release death in waves of snow. Every second they climbed deeper into peril, yet they moved with grace, their muscles taut, their bodies shining with health, unaware that strength means nothing when the earth itself betrays you. The sky was beginning to change, clouds drifting across the pale blue, shadows stretching over the ridge, as if the heavens themselves were preparing to mourn the lives soon to be lost. The goats pressed closer together, mothers guiding kids across narrow ridges, unaware that unity would not save them when destruction came roaring down from above. No predator dared stalk them here, but they were standing in the path of a hunter far deadlier than teeth and claws, one that would devour them all without a single drop of blood spilled. The herd trusted their instincts, but instincts cannot predict the hunger of snow, the rage of gravity, or the silence before disaster shatters the calm of the world. The youngest leapt joyfully, their playful bleats echoing in the cliffs, their innocence mocking the storm of death that waited only moments away. 4. The first roar of collapse, it came suddenly, a thunderclap from the mountain's heart, the roar of snow breaking free from its prison, echoing like the voice of an angry god across the cliffs and valleys. The ground beneath the herd shook violently, rattling stones loose and sending them crashing down as if the world itself was trying to warn the goats of the doom rushing toward them. Above, a massive wall of snow cracked and tore apart, sliding forward in jagged waves, a white monster awakened, hungering for everything in its path. The herd froze, ears pricked, eyes wide, but they did not understand, their instincts confused by a sound too large, too alien, too final to comprehend. The avalanche roared louder, its voice a hurricane of breaking ice, a tidal wave of white racing toward them with speed no living creature could outrun. The snow split into rivers, rushing down the slopes like liquid fire, swallowing trees, rocks, and air itself, turning the mountain into a rolling storm of death. The goats bolted instinctively, hoofs scraping against ice, bodies leaping in desperate attempts to flee, but no direction was safe, no ledge untouched by the falling world. Mothers pushed kids forward, bleeding with urgency, their cries swallowed instantly by the thunder of the avalanche as it descended with unstoppable force. Snow surged downward like a beast alive, swallowing the lower slopes, breaking trees as if they were grass, pulling the sky itself into its endless hunger. The wind of the avalanche hit first, a violent blast that knocked goats from their footing, sending them tumbling before the snow even reached them. Panic exploded through the herd, their movements no longer graceful but desperate, hoofs scrambling against ledges that crumbled beneath them. Some leapt into thin air, preferring the deadly fall to the suffocating wave of snow that bore down like the wrath of heaven itself. The roar was deafening now, louder than thunder, louder than storms, a sound that filled every crack of the mountain and every breath of the dying herd. The avalanche poured downward with speed like lightning, swallowing everything in seconds, each wave higher and deadlier than the last. 5. The desperate struggle the avalanche struck with terrifying speed, and in that chaos the goats tried to fight for life, their hooves clawing at ledges that disappeared under waves of snow, their cries sharp but instantly lost in the roar of destruction. Mothers pushed their kids forward, but the rushing snow pulled them back like a river of death, dragging them into its depths where light vanished, and breath turned into suffocating silence. The herd scattered in panic, each body leaping in random directions, their instincts pushing them to escape even when no escape remained, movements desperate shadows against the white storm. One goat leapt across a gap, landing on a rocky outcrop, but the snow swallowed that ledge within seconds, erasing safety faster than it appeared, proving that there was no ground firm enough to survive. The older goats braced themselves, lowering their horns, but what strength could horns hold against a mountain tearing itself apart, against snow that weighed more than entire forests? The avalanche grew stronger, louder, more merciless with every passing moment, its voice drowning out everything else. Kids bleated in terror, their small bodies lifted by the blast of icy wind before being smothered by white waves that buried them without mercy, without pause, without regret. The herd's unity dissolved completely, each animal alone in its final seconds, their struggles swallowed by the endless hunger of the avalanche. The snow clung to them, freezing their fur, weighing down their limbs, turning their graceful bodies into stumbling shadows before pulling them into the abyss below. No goat could stop, no goat could resist, for the avalanche was not a predator that spared the strong, it was a storm that consumed everything, equal in its destruction, blind in its rage. The mountain groaned under the force of its own collapse, stones crashing down alongside the snow, striking bodies that were already falling, breaking what was already broken. Some goats tumbled into ravines, their bodies striking against jagged rocks before being hidden beneath the same white flood that covered the slopes in a shroud of death. The herd's cries vanished entirely, replaced by the constant roar, until silence began creeping in beneath the noise, the silence of lives ending all at once. 6. Silence after the storm. The avalanche ended as suddenly as it had begun, its roar fading into whispers of sliding snow, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt like the mountain itself mourned what it had taken. Where moments before there had been chaos and motion, now only a flat field of snow remained, smooth, deceptive, hiding the bodies of the goats beneath layers of icy weight. The air was heavy, carrying no cries, no hoofbeats, no sound of life, only the faint creaking of settling snow as the avalanche pressed down upon everything it had buried. The mountain stood still, its slopes scarred and broken, its cliffs dusted in the remains of destruction, yet outwardly it appeared calm, as if nothing had happened at all. The valley below was transformed into a white desert, every tree snapped or smothered, every rock buried, every sign of the herd erased except for faint shadows in the snow. The silence was not peace but a graveyard's hush, the kind that follows tragedy, where the weight of absence is louder than any cry that came before. Predators that lurked in the forest paused, their senses confused, for there was no scent, no trail, nothing left to follow, only the cold cover of death. Birds circled above, drawn by instinct to tragedy, but even they hesitated, their wings beating quietly, afraid to disturb the stillness that lay like a shroud over the valley. The snow covered the goats completely, sealing them in frozen tombs, their final struggles preserved in twisted forms beneath the surface. The mountain had reclaimed them without leaving a trace for the eye, its power both majestic and cruel, reminding all who watched that life in its shadow was fragile and fleeting. Time slowed in the aftermath, every moment stretched by silence, the landscape holding its breath as if afraid to wake the storm again. The sky grew darker, clouds gathering slowly, as though even heaven itself bowed its head in mourning for the lives buried below. The silence grew heavier with every passing second, pressing upon the ears, upon the heart, upon the memory of what had been lost. No voice rose, no sound broke through, except the faint drip of melting snow, like quiet tears shed by the mountain for the herd it had destroyed. The stillness stretched across the slopes, hiding the violence that had happened, turning tragedy into calm, death into silence, destruction into deceptive beauty. 7. Nature's indifference. The avalanche showed in the cruelest way that nature has no compassion, no sense of justice, no pause to spare those who are young or weak, for its power moves blindly, sweeping away life without hesitation. The mountain that had nurtured the goats for generations, providing grass, shelter, and rocky paths for survival, turned into their executioner in a single hour, stripping away the illusion of safety in its shadow. The herd had roamed freely, strong and resilient, believing the slopes were theirs to command, but in truth they were only guests, and the mountain decided when their time would end. Nature is not enemy or friend, it simply acts. Storms roll, avalanches fall, lightning strikes, and in their wake life is erased without regret, reminding all that survival is temporary and fragile. The goats' cries were swallowed not because they were unheard but because nature does not hear, it does not bend. It does not choose mercy, it acts, and its actions are final. The indifference of nature is the deepest wound, for there was no malice, no predator hunting them. Only snow falling from a height too great, with a force too vast to withstand. Even the strongest goats, those who had led the herd for years, found their power meaningless, their wisdom useless, their strength erased by a weight of snow that cared for none of it. The mountain had always been beautiful, crowned with white peaks, glowing under the sun. But beauty hides cruelty, for behind the snow's glimmer lay the power to kill without warning. To the human eye, the aftermath looked serene, as if nothing terrible had occurred, yet beneath the calm lay bodies frozen in eternal stillness, lives ended by nature's unfeeling hand. The goats that once danced on ridges were now part of the mountain's silence, their deaths a story written in snow, reminding us that life here is borrowed, never owned. The avalanche was not punishment, not anger, not even chance, it was inevitability. A moment bound to happen, and the goats were merely present at the wrong time and place. The herd became a lesson carved into the wilderness, that no matter how adapted, how skilled, how strong, nature can erase even the most resilient in one sweeping gesture. The indifference of the storm left no space for mourning, no pause for sorrow, it simply moved on, leaving only silence and scars upon the land. The mountain will grow green again in spring, flowers will bloom, birds will return, but the herd will not rise. For nature does not grieve, it continues without memory. The snow that killed them will melt into rivers, feeding grass and soil, perhaps nourishing new life. 8. The frozen tomb. The avalanche created not only death but also a tomb of snow and ice, a frozen graveyard that sealed the goats beneath its weight, preserving them in silence as though nature itself was their coffin. Beneath the smooth white surface lay twisted bodies, still in the positions of their final struggles, hooves stretched upward, heads turned sideways, each pose a silent scream frozen in time. The snow pressed so heavy that breath had no chance, heart stopped not by choice but by suffocation. The cold ensured that their remains would not vanish quickly but endure as icy shadows below. The mountain built a tomb without walls or markers, without stone or wood, yet stronger than any man could build. A grave that kept its dead hidden from all but memory. Unlike predators that leave behind bones scattered by hunger, the avalanche hid its victims completely, sealing them away, making it seem as if the goats had simply vanished from existence. But beneath the surface, the herd remained, their bodies cold but intact, preserved by frost, trapped in a graveyard that no hand of mercy could uncover. Each layer of snow pressed tighter, as if nature wished not to show its cruelty, as if the mountain wanted its violence forgotten beneath beauty. Yet even beauty cannot hide truth forever, for the snow itself whispered of what lay beneath, its silence heavy, its stillness filled with unspoken stories of loss. To walk across that surface would be to walk across graves, each step pressing upon lives that once leapt and danced freely upon the same mountain slopes. The frozen tomb stretched across the valley, wide and deep, swallowing not just the goats, but also the memory of their herd, hiding it within a white shroud of deception. Winter deepened the grave, snow falling upon snow, until the avalanche became part of the mountain's natural dress, indistinguishable from the rest of its cold body. The goats were buried not as individuals but as a herd, their tomb shared, their deaths bound together. 9. The mountain's betrayal. The goats had trusted the mountain with their very lives, for every ledge, every ridge, every slope was their home, a place of survival, safety, and belonging, but in a single avalanche that trust was shattered. For generations they had climbed its walls, grazed its grasses, and given birth upon its cliffs, believing it to be their protector. The avalanche began with the mountain breaking apart, sending down the snow it had held, unleashing a storm from within itself, turning friend into executioner in one brutal breath. The goats did not expect betrayal, for instinct told them the mountain was their ally, but instincts failed when the very earth beneath them turned into a rushing wave of death. It was as if the mountain chose that moment to remind them that it owed them nothing, that their existence was only permitted. Every leap, every climb, every survival trick that the goats had mastered meant nothing. For the betrayal came not from weakness but from the very place that gave them strength. The snow that had once quenched their thirst as melting water now drowned them, the cliffs that once sheltered them now crumbled, the ridges that once lifted them high now buried them low. The betrayal was total, for it left no chance, no warning, no escape, only sudden ruin that no skill, no strength, no courage could overcome. The herd had believed themselves safe, surrounded by their home, yet safety proved illusion. The mountain stripped them of that illusion in a single hour of collapse. To die by predator is fate, to die by hunger is chance, but to die by the very earth you trust is betrayal, a cruel end that strips even dignity from the fallen. The goat's story became one of betrayal as much as tragedy, for their loyalty to the mountain, their dependence. It was not a betrayal of intention, for the mountain had no will, yet to the herd, the collapse was nothing less than a betrayal of trust. A sudden turning of ally into enemy. The avalanche was the mountain's voice, declaring that life on its slopes was temporary, conditional, fragile. No matter how long the herd had roamed there. Each goat buried was not just a victim of snow but of faith misplaced, of trust broken, of loyalty unanswered. The betrayal cut deeper than death itself, for it proved that in nature, trust is only illusion, and the mountain is master, not partner, not friend. Generations of survival meant nothing, for all was erased in a single moment of collapse, all history swallowed by the white wave. The mountain, still standing tall, bore no scars of guilt, no cracks of sorrow, only silence, as though nothing had been lost, as though betrayal meant nothing. The goats became its victims and its shadows, lives given to the same slopes that had once given them safety. 10. Lessons of survival. The avalanche that buried the mountain goats left behind not only silence but also a lesson. A harsh reminder written in snow that survival is never guaranteed, no matter how skilled, strong, or adapted. The goats had mastered balance on cliffs, speed on slopes, unity in herds, yet all of it was powerless against a force too vast. Teaching that survival depends not only on skill but also on chance. Nature is not a teacher in kindness but in truth. The truth shone that day was clear. No creature, no herd, no species can claim safety forever in a world ruled by storms and stone. The goat's tragedy spoke not just of loss but of the fragility of life itself, reminding us that in nature, Every day of survival is a gift borrowed, never owned. The lesson lies not in defeat but in respect, for those who live near mountains must remember. Survival is not about control but about acceptance, knowing that nature gives and takes, and the avalanche was its way of showing the balance of both. The herd's death became a story of humility, showing that even the strongest can fall, even the surest can stumble, even the wisest can be undone. Their story became a warning for all creatures who call the mountains home. Never forget that safety is an illusion, and trust must always be cautious. The goats' end also became part of the cycle, their frozen bodies feeding the land in spring, nourishing grass that would feed other herds, proving that survival continues even after death. The mountain does not stop life but transforms it, reminding that survival is not eternal but a chain, one life leading into another, one death feeding another birth. The avalanche was cruel but also honest, teaching that nature has no favorites, that balance requires sacrifice, and sometimes the sacrifice is entire herds. For humans who witness, the lesson is clear: respect the mountain, for arrogance will be punished, and no skill is greater than the weight of falling snow. The goat's tragedy stands as a monument not of defeat but of truth, that life is fragile, survival is uncertain, and respect for the wild is the only path to wisdom. To live in nature is to live with risk, and the goat's end proves that the wild is not a place of safety but of constant trial. The lesson of their survival and their death is written in silence, carried by the mountain. Remembered by those who see the snow not as beauty alone but as danger. 11. The silence after the roar. When the avalanche ended, the mountain valley fell into an unnatural silence that pressed heavily on every heart. Where once the cries of goats echoed proudly, only the muffled weight of snow remained, burying every sound in icy darkness. The thunder of falling snow had vanished, leaving behind a stillness more terrifying than the roar itself. Every slope, every ledge, every rock disappeared under a suffocating blanket of frozen death. No sound of hooves, no bleats of fear, no flutter of wings dared disturb the air. Rescuers who approached could hear only their footsteps sinking into the icy crust. It was the silence of a graveyard, vast and merciless, stretching across the mountain face. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, whispering softly as if afraid to break the stillness. The mountain appeared frozen in mourning, refusing to speak of what it had taken. Birds that once circled overhead vanished into the horizon, sensing the weight of loss. The hush was not peace, but a heavy reminder of lives stolen in an instant. Every human who stood there felt the crushing presence of death's quiet shadow. 12. The survivors who escaped the icy doom amid the destruction. A handful of goats clung desperately to narrow cliffs beyond the avalanche's reach. Their bodies shook with fear, but instinct forced their hooves to grip the stone with unnatural strength. The earth shook beneath them, and snow raged below, yet they refused to surrender. Wide-eyed and terrified, they watched their world vanish beneath waves of crushing ice. Frost covered their fur, but their stubborn will to live kept them pressed against stone. Every second felt like eternity as the avalanche thundered past their fragile ledges. Some slipped but regained balance, their muscles straining under pure survival. 13. The mountain as a silent killer. The mountain, once seen as a guardian of life, revealed itself as a silent executioner. For generations it had offered grass, ledges, and safety from predators, yet in an instant it turned. Snow, piled high in beauty, betrayed the herd with its sudden collapse. The goats that trusted its cliffs became victims of its hidden cruelty. There was no warning, no sign of mercy, only the cold truth of nature's indifference. The slopes that nurtured them became their tomb, erasing every trace of life. The mountain killed without anger, without intention, only through silent collapse. Its betrayal was not loud, it was silent, merciless, and final. Every ledge that had once saved lives became the coffin that sealed them. 14. The search beneath the white shroud. Rescuers arrived with shovels and axes, cutting desperately into the frozen wasteland. They hoped for movement, a sound, or even the faint breath of life. But the snow lay heavy, unyielding, as if determined to keep its secrets buried. Every layer dug revealed not survival but silence locked in icy graves. Some horns and hooves appeared, frozen in positions of struggle. The rescuers' hearts sank as they realized the herd had no chance. Each body they uncovered told a story of panic and helplessness. Goats were found huddled together, as if clinging to one another in final moments. Others lay scattered, broken by the violent rush of snow. 15. The herd's legacy and memory. Though buried beneath ice, the herd lived on in the memory of those who knew them. For years, shepherds, hikers, and villagers had seen them leaping proudly across cliffs. They were not just animals, they were symbols of resilience against a harsh mountain life. Now, their absence left a void heavier than the snow itself. People spoke of them with reverence, as if they were guardians of the peaks. The goats had been woven into the culture of the land, more than just creatures. Children grew up hearing stories of their strength and agility on impossible slopes. Now, those stories carried sorrow, reshaped by tragedy into elegies of survival. The avalanche may have stolen their lives, but it could not erase their presence. Their memory lingered in songs, in tales, and in the silence of the mountain. Every cliff they once touched became sacred, a reminder of both beauty and loss. The tragedy carved their existence deeper into the identity of the mountain folk. No one would look at the slopes again without remembering the herd buried beneath. Their death was not an end but a transformation into legend and warning. 16. The eternal snow tomb. The avalanche did not just bury bodies, it created a tomb carved out of snow and silence. Every flake that once glittered like beauty became part of a monument to destruction. The mountain goats rested beneath layers too heavy to escape, too thick to breathe through. This white tomb was not built by hands but by the ruthless force of nature's collapse. No stone marked their resting place, only the endless sweep of snow across the slopes. The silence above their tomb was heavier than words, more final than any grave. 17. The warning written in white. The avalanche was not only destruction, it was a warning carved into the mountain's skin. Every slope that glistened with snow carried the thread of collapse beneath its beauty. The goat's tragedy became a message for every living thing that roamed the peaks. Nature is powerful, and its gifts are tied tightly to its dangers. The mountain had spoken in a language of snow, and its voice could not be ignored. Humans who climbed after that day carried fear in their footsteps. They remembered that silence could become thunder in the blink of an eye. The warning was etched not in words, but in the lifeless forms beneath the snow. It said that safety was an illusion, and survival was always borrowed time. 18. The grief of the villagers. The people in the valleys below had watched the goats for years as companions of the peaks. They saw them as neighbors, guardians, and symbols of strength against hardship. When the avalanche struck, grief spread like winter through every household. Children cried when told the herd would never be seen leaping again. Elders shook their heads, remembering the generations of goats lost in a moment. The silence on the mountains echoed down into the villages, heavy and endless. It was as if the land itself had lost part of its soul. The goats were not pets, but they were family in the way only nature can provide. 19. Nature's balance of beauty and death. The avalanche revealed the cruel paradox of nature's design. The same snow that dazzled travelers with beauty became the weapon of destruction. The same mountain that sheltered the herd turned into their executioner. Life and death stood side by side, separated by moments of chance. Nature never promises mercy, only balance, even when balance feels cruel. The goats had thrived for years, feeding, climbing, and living free upon the slopes. Their joy was real, but so was the danger hidden within their home. The avalanche was not evil, nor was it kind, it was simply inevitable. The mountain was beautiful, yet its beauty was edged with lethal sharpness. To love the mountain was to risk being consumed by it. This balance made survival both precious and fragile, never permanent. 20. The eternal legend of the fallen herd. Time passed, but the story of the avalanche never faded from memory. The goats who once ruled the cliffs became legends carried by voices and songs. Children grew up hearing of their strength, their leaps, and their tragic fall. The herd became more than animals, they became eternal figures of myth. The avalanche turned their death into a story that echoed across generations. Travelers who visited the mountains whispered of the goats buried beneath. Guides told the tale as both a warning and a remembrance. The avalanche that buried the mountain goats was not just a tragedy but a reminder of nature's ultimate authority. Even creatures perfectly adapted to rugged terrain could not resist the overwhelming force of collapsing snow. What we see as breathtaking mountains are also landscapes of sudden danger where survival is never guaranteed. This event teaches us about resilience but also about the vulnerability of life in the wilderness. The goat's fate echoes through the valley, a story of silence after chaos, of stillness after a storm. Disasters like this remind us of the urgency to respect ecosystems and the dangers within them. Each natural tragedy carries lessons about adaptation, protection, and the unpredictability of wild landscapes. As we reflect, we also honor the strength of animals that continue to face challenges beyond human imagination. If you found this story powerful, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe for more untold tales of nature's extremes. Thank you for watching, and until next time, remember that every corner of nature holds both wonder and warning.